All right, so today I want to bring up something that I've talked about before. I brought it up recently, and I wanted to talk about it because, for many reasons. The first one being is Canada is headed down the same path as this with our crazy climate alarmist government, and I wanted to refer to the fact that the California power grid is near collapse again, according to the California Globe here. But um, so California, basically, for anyone who doesn't know, is having or on the verge of having rolling blackouts in that they don't have enough energy to supply the state. And this is for many reasons. Number one, they've doubled down on this the whole renewables garbage. And not to mention too, their power grid is very, very old and outdated. I believe that they have some parts of their power grid literally date back to the 1920s. That's what I've heard. And not to mention a lot of it dates back to like the 40s, 50s. So that probably surprises a lot of people. And they're like, well, why don't they replace it? Well, why they don't replace it, at least from what I've heard, and the thing that makes sense is that they've, rather than replace it, they're doubling down on renewables. And like we know about renewables over and over again, this is a lesson we're going to have to learn, is they're not reliable. And not to mention too, they're not worth it too. Like in the end, you lose money on renewables. Like I know people who are not in the industry, but in sub industries, and they've said, yeah, there's no way that if you wanted to power your house off renewables, you would lose money. That it's not even possible, at least with existing technology. And again, this is people who could literally get the panels for free, or at the very least at cost, So for the average person, you'd for sure be losing. You'd be losing even more money. So when it comes to individuals, yeah, that's the point. And it's same goes for the states too. Like the same goes for the states and the provinces. That there's many downsides to renewables. Number one, they're not reliable because again, there's always the case of what happens when it's not windy or sunny. And again, this is California, right? Like this is California, a place that's supposedly always sunny, especially in the southern part of the state. And Alberta, for example, especially in the northern part, in the winter, there's a lot of days where it's not very sunny and not very windy. And if it's minus 20, minus 30, we are screwed, right? Because again, the power is going to, and this is the other thing too, you bring up with the average person and they're like, oh, you can just have batteries, right? Like you can just have batteries. But they're so ignorant of reality that they don't realize that the battery technology is so poor that you can't just store unlimited energy. That's the technology's nowhere near the ability to do that, right? So that's another thing that you talk to these people and they're just so ignorant of reality. It's not even funny. If that was the case too, there wouldn't be rolling blackouts, right? So and not to mention too that they have all their regulations and all that garbage too as well. So this is the problem, that if we do go down this route, which it's looking like we are, what happens when it's minus 20 or minus 30 and we run out of power? Well, what's going to happen is a lot of people are going to die. Not to mention, too, a lot of people are going to have issues with their houses because pipes are going to freeze. That's going to cause a lot of damage. Um, that's going to be unbelievable amounts of damage too. A lot of people aren't going to be able to afford to fix that. So again, a lot of people, like, I don't even want to know all the negative consequences that could come of this. And let's take a step back and talk about, well, why is it, are they pushing for all this kind of stuff? Well, why they're pushing for all this kind of stuff is they believe at the very least they have a flawed ideology. I would argue a completely wrong ideology, in that there's no evidence behind the idea that we need to transition off fossil fuels to begin with. And they always bring up the fact, well, it's not sustainable. Well, it's not sustainable to have renewables at this point either. And the other thing to point out too is that if renewables are the future, then why are all the developing nations across the world, namely India and China, why are they doubling down on renewables? Like China and India, I believe, put out more than half of the world's emissions. Just those two countries. They are the two highest populated countries, but again, if you're worried about climate change, then that shouldn't matter to you, right? Like that shouldn't matter. So yeah, that's the thing, is that if renewables are the future, then why are these third world countries or developing countries, why are they not, installing renewables? Because they would be ahead of the curve if renewables truly are the future. Now, why are they doing that? Because renewables aren't the future. Like, they're not. Like, and for the simple reason that um, there's no need to do it in the first place. I mean, for starters. And secondly, it's way too expensive. Like, fossil fuels are still so much cheaper that that's why these countries are still using them, right? Because they're way, way, way cheaper. And I mean, they're easier to maintain, all that kind of stuff. And not to mention, too, the idea of renewables being, carbon neutral or net zero or whatever you want to call it, it's complete BS, right? Because um, to make and install wind turbines, there needs to be a lot of emissions used because, again, those things are very big. If you've ever been right near one of those, you don't realize just how big those are until you're right beside them. You obviously need, specialized trucks to um, truck those into wherever you're putting them up, and you need, cranes to put them up probably. So again, that's going to put out a lot of emissions. Not to mention, too, those end up in landfills, right? And this is the other flaw of renewables too, is people think that you put them up once and they're good forever, and that's complete BS as well, because they're not good forever. They're good for what, maybe 10, 20 years tops. That's what I've heard. Solar panel, I've heard, yeah, it's like 10, 20 years. I don't know about wind, but those end up in landfills. Not to mention, too, the mining process when it comes to getting the materials to make the solar panels is like the blood diamond kind of stuff. Like, it's just terrible, the stuff that goes on and has to go on for that kind of stuff. So again, the idea that this being, oh, it's net zero and all this kind of, no, it's complete BS. Like, it's complete BS. So, and like I say, bringing it back to the main point here is Canada's headed down this path. We have a government that, oh, we're having a green economy going forward. And what's that going to be? It's just going to be doubling down on wind and solar and regulating fossil fuels out of existence, not because they're worse or anything, that they're just going to regulate them out of business. And this is the thing, too, is that the other thing is that if renewables truly were the future, then um, fossil fuel companies would slowly go out of business, right? Like, you wouldn't need to regulate them or tax them out of business, because if they were truly not the future, then they would be transitioning towards wind and solar themselves. Again, so it's another reason that they're not actually the future. They are still the future. No, I'm not saying that they're going to be around forever, but for the reason that um, if they're not the future, it's going to be because the government just regulates them or just flat out bans them, right? It's not going to be because they're worse. It's going to be because the government just forces the hand, basically. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to bring up too. And like I say, for all these people who think, oh, it's not going to happen here, it's going to happen here. I mean, especially if the NDP get elected in Alberta, they're going to do this kind of stuff, right? Like, they'll probably put in another carbon tax, which will just force more oil and gas companies to move out. They'll double down on wind and solar, even though it's complete garbage and there's no point of it. Um, and we'll probably end up in this same situation, right? Like, we'll probably end up in this same situation. And this is the thing too. I believe Alberta already imports a lot of energy. I don't know if it's a lot, but it's a decent amount of energy from the States. So again, and not to mention too, we're a growing population. So, and this is the other thing that the left never brings up too when it comes to immigration, is that you need to be constantly increasing the supply if you're going to be increasing the supply of people, but they never really do that, right? They never come up with a plan of, okay, how are we going to increase housing? How are we going to create new jobs? How are we going to, create more, or give companies the ability to create more energy? No, it's just, let's bring them in and we'll figure it out later, right? And this is the problem, why there's so many problems, why the unemployment rate's so high, why the cost of housing is through the roof in most of these big cities. Because again, the government just, yep, we'll bring them all in and we'll figure it out later, and they never actually get around to that. So anyway, yeah, that's what I wanted to bring up today. So if you like the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, on BitChute, and on Parler. All those links are in the description, so make sure you check me out there as well.